Well, it's great to have everybody here this morning. What a gorgeous day we have ahead of us. And we're in a series on the book of James chapter 1. We're just looking at James chapter 1 for this month of May. So let's read this passage together. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything that they do. Go ahead and have a seat. Good morning again. So excited to be here. It's Mother's Day. In case you haven't heard about that, is anybody just finding that out now, right? Might want to slip out and make a couple of phone calls. But anyway, just wanted to say happy Mother's Day to my mom. She was in the first service. You know, the older I get, the more I appreciate some of the things that my mom had to put up with when she raised me. My mom is what they now call a boy mom, right? Which means she only had boys until later on. Then we became foster parents, and then she had a girl later on. But for most of my early years, it was mom and the three boys. And raising boys is not always easy, particularly the three of us. We were a handful. Well, mostly me. I was actually most of the problem. I was diagnosed with a hyperactivity disorder when I was 5 years old. It was an accidental diagnosis. My mom was at the doctor's office for herself. She was getting treatment for something else, but I was with her that day as a 5-year-old, and the entire time we were in the waiting room, I was climbing up a chair, sliding down through the hole in the chair, rolling around on the ground, climbing up the chair, sliding down through the chair, rolling around, and doing that just non-stop the entire time, over and over again. This is what my mom had to deal with day after day, this little hyperactive bundle of energy. I was a cute kid, which helped me to get away with it, right? Like you can just kind of give up that smile, a big cheeky smile, and, then parents are like, oh man, he looks so cute. But I was a terror. So we were in the doctor's office, and my doctor watched what was going on. He said to my mom, I'm going to help you with what is troubling you. And he looked at me and he's like, he put me on Ritalin. He was like, happy Mother's Day. Your boy is hyperactive and he needs to be medicated. Best 3 months of my mom's life, probably. The months that I was on Ritalin, I was calm and relaxed and sitting still and spaced out and drugged up, but this was great, right? Best 3 months of mom's parenting years, I'm sure. But when I was on Ritalin, I started having hallucinations. I would stand in front of the window and say, there's a cat outside, and my mom would come to the window, Stephen, there's no cat out there, but I was like seeing it, and I'm like, no, it's right there. So probably the hardest decision of mom's life, do I take him off of this? I mean, this last 3 months have been so good. I get so much done. There's less mess in the house. This is a pretty good deal, but mom was a good mom, and there was no way she was going to keep me on that medication. So I went off Ritalin, went back to being a hyperactive boy. Mom had to put up with me. So happy Mother's Day to my mom. When you think about it, your moms are special, and they put up with so much while they're raising us. I had to laugh at one mom who reached out kind of tongue-in-cheek on Twitter. She said, please pray for my son who had to empty the dishwasher when he just did that yesterday and he is so tired, right? Do you remember that? I remember saying those kind of things to my parents. Mom is trying to get me to work and do things around the house. Mom, I'm so tired. This is so hard. But blessed are the moms and dads who persevere when their kids, with their kids, getting them to do things around the house, because eventually your kids grow up with some great habits and skills that they can use for the rest of their lives. I love this post from a guy about his mom. He says, my mom is a prosecutor, which means she's a lawyer. My mom is a prosecutor. Every year she brings up the fact that Mother's Day is the day with the lowest crime rate. Did you know that? Out of all 365 days in the year, Mother's Day has the lowest crime rate. So he says, my mom's a prosecutor. Every year she brings up this fact that Mother's Day is the day with the lowest crime rate. Then he writes, I think that says a lot about how many moms commit crimes throughout the year, but can't today because they're too busy being celebrated. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying there's a correlation here, right? So happy Mother's Day to all the moms. You can take the day off, go back to committing crimes tomorrow. Be good today. But that's a powerful stat. Mother's Day, the lowest crime rate day of the year. What I think that reveals is the power, positive power that motherhood has in our lives, that even the most hardened criminals are taking the day off, calling their moms, thinking about their moms. Moms, you are so important, and the role that you have to play in the lives of your family is so important. We're in a series studying James chapter 1. James is talking about trials. He's talking about how do you find joy in your trials. He says, we are all going to go through troubles in life. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We will all go through difficult times and hard times and troubling times. How do you get through those troubles? How do you make it through those hard times? We learned last week that James says you count it all joy. You start to look at these trials through the lens of what God wants to do in your life. You start to see that God is bigger than all of these momentary troubles that you are going through in life. And then James says you ask for wisdom. He says in verse 5, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. In other words, when you are going through trouble, there is going to come a point in time where you will say, I don't know what to do. Sure, it's great to hear that God is there. It's great to be reminded that God is bigger than my troubles, that God is with me in my troubles. But sooner or later, when we're going through trouble, we start to realize that putting on a happy face is not the only solution. It's a start. Taking a joyful attitude is a start, but it's not the only solution. At a certain point, we also need wisdom. How am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get through this? How am I going to resolve this? What practical steps do I take to sort this out? James says, if you need wisdom, let me ask you this morning, where do you need wisdom? Are you going through trouble in a certain area of your life? Is there a relationship problem that you're dealing with? Is there a person at work or a situation at work that is just dragging you down? Is there a financial trouble that you're facing right now? What is going on in your life? What kind of trouble is staring you in the face right now today? James says, first thing, you face it with joy. You face it with hope. You face it with trust. But then at a certain point, you're going to need to ask for wisdom. If you need wisdom, what kind of trouble are you going through? Where do you need wisdom today? When our kids were young, we needed wisdom about something that our son Michael was going through. Michael was 6 years old at the time. He was in grade 1. We'd just moved to a new city. Michael had left behind the best friends that he had ever known, the best friend that he'd ever known at the time. His name was Matthew. These two guys were inseparable. They were just bonded together as friends. So the move was hard for him. And he was struggling, and we could tell he was having a tough time. We asked God, what do we do about this? We decided that as we prayed about it, we decided to homeschool our kids for that year because our kids were going through another transition, moving to another city, starting off making new friends. We thought it would be wise to homeschool them for a year to help build stability in the family, to help them with the emotions of the transition and all that sort of thing. And oh my goodness, we learned so much during that year. First of all, we learned that teaching is really hard. We learned to appreciate teachers. We already did appreciate teachers, but our thankfulness for the people who taught our kids just increased so much during that year. And we also learned a lot about our kids. We learned their individual learning styles. We learned more about their personalities and the way that they each approach learning, so it was beneficial in that way. But let me describe for you the day that we decided we weren't going to homeschool anymore. My wife was at home teaching our son Michael. Sarah was all caught up in work, so she was over at a friend's house. So it's just Angela and Michael at home. They're going through a subject that Michael just hated. And Michael decided that he was done. He got up, he announced that he's running away. He left the house, he hopped on his scooter, took off. And so Angela, of course, took off after him, right? She started searching for him at the park about 2 blocks from her house. But Michael had hatched a plan, and he hid, and he watched as his mom walked by, and then he took off back to the house. He locked his mom out of the house. And Angela got back to the house, and there was Michael standing at the window looking out at her, and she started to say, "You let me in, young man. You open this door right now." But Michael said, "I'm calling the police on you. What you're doing is child abuse. Trying to teach me math," or whatever subject it was. So I get a call at work. It's 9:30 in the morning. The day's just barely started. It was Angela. "I need you to come home. Michael has locked me out of the house. He's threatening to call the police." And we needed wisdom. We needed wisdom. Where do you need wisdom today? So James says, if you need wisdom. Later on in chapter 3, James actually is going to define a little bit more about what wisdom is. And James is going to name 4 kinds of wisdom. In James chapter 3, he mentions earthly wisdom. So you're going to go through trouble with your kids, trouble at work, trouble with a friend, financial trouble. Where do you go for wisdom? First place we go naturally is we look to earthly wisdom. We get on Instagram, we search Google, we start to look for a solution to our problem. Okay, there has to be somebody else who has gone through this. There has to be somebody else who has faced this and has found some solutions that work for them. What did they do? Earthly wisdom is when we look to people who have experienced something similar to our situation, and we start to ask them, okay, what did you do? How did you solve this? What steps did you take? How did people respond? How would you recommend that we solve this problem? And earthly wisdom is great. Earthly wisdom is valuable. In fact, it would be foolish not to try to learn from the experiences of others. So looking to earthly wisdom makes sense. It's a natural response. You go to the sources, you look for others who have faced a similar situation. You find out if they have anything that they can say that can help you. That's the process of gaining wisdom. James also says there's intellectual wisdom. James actually uses the term unspiritual wisdom to describe this kind of wisdom, but he's talking about the wisdom of the age, the wisdom of his age. So in any given era, there are solutions to problems that are unique to that particular era of time. This is intellectual wisdom. How should we deal with environmental issues, for example? Well, how do we protect the environment? Well, if you go back in history, the answer keeps changing. Decades ago, the answer was, well, let's use plastic because we need to save the trees, right? Now it's like, let's not use plastic because, little turtles are getting wrapped up in plastic, so let's now use trees again, right? So, I thought we were supposed to save trees, but, I don't understand. But intellectual wisdom is whatever is the standard of the day. How do you deal with mental health struggles? 50 years ago, we were using shock therapy. We were locking people up in asylums. Now the prevailing theory is to use different medications to help manage emotions and help manage the mood of the patient. We use advanced cognitive therapy techniques. We understand more about the role of exercise in dealing with depression and anxiety. 50 years ago, we disciplined kids differently than we do today. All of these things change depending on the era that you're in. So there's practical wisdom, that is earthly wisdom. There's the wisdom of experience. Then there's intellectual wisdom. What's the prevailing wisdom of the day? What is science telling us? What are recent scientific studies telling us? Then there is devilish wisdom. And this kind of wisdom is really evil. It's the kind of wisdom that's out to cause trouble. It's the kind of wisdom that's out to divide people and divide families and cause all sorts of problems. It's not really wisdom, but it comes across as wisdom. If you ever talk to somebody and they're just saying something that sounds so bizarre and so foolish, and yet they have been on YouTube and they saw something on Facebook and they've done a deep dive into some strange topic and they're just convinced that it is true. And as you hear them talk, you're thinking, where is this coming from? Where is the wisdom in this? How is this wisdom? And there's really no wisdom in it. It's devilish wisdom. It's anti-wisdom. It's a strategy of the enemy to lead this individual down a dark path. James calls it demonic wisdom. James chapter 3 tells us that these three kinds of wisdom, earthly wisdom, intellectual wisdom, and devilish wisdom, can lead to jealousy and selfish ambition. Listen to what James says. He says, "For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic." So James is saying here there's these different kinds of wisdom. There's wisdom that's earthly, there's wisdom that's unspiritual, there's wisdom that's demonic. And he's saying, what's the fruit of these kinds of wisdom? Well, the fruit of these kinds of wisdom can lead to jealousy and can lead to selfishness. They also can lead to disorder and maybe even evil. James continues on in 3:16. He says, "For wherever there's jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind." James says, look at the fruit. If the wisdom that you're leaning on leads to jealousy and selfish ambition, if the wisdom that you're trusting in leads to disorder and evil of every kind, then be very careful about adopting that wisdom. And James is giving us a warning here. He's saying that if your only source of wisdom is earthly, intellectual, or devilish, you might not get the results that you're looking for. Just think about politics. We're in the middle of a political campaign here in Alberta. I encourage all of you to vote. Everyone that's eligible to vote, get out and cast your ballot. And as Christians, I do believe we need to be praying about our elections. As different elections come up, we need to be bringing the results of those elections before God and trusting God and asking God for His best and for His will to be done. Every election is important, and we're fortunate to have the ability to choose the people who will lead us for the next 4 years. So get out and vote. But take a look at politics right now. Take a look at the different political parties and the different solutions that are being put forward for different problems. They're based on earthly wisdom. There's some amount of practical wisdom in some of the solutions. They're based on intellectual wisdom. There's some amount of scientific research and scientific study and a background study that's been done that is leading them to put forward this platform. Maybe some of it is devilish wisdom, but what's the result of all this wisdom? There's division across North America in politics right now. There's jealousy, there's selfish ambition across North America in politics right now. What you see happening with politics right now is a great example of what James is talking about here. He's saying, look at the fruit. Is this really wisdom? James is arguing here in chapter 3 that earthly wisdom, as great as it is, intellectual wisdom, as valuable as it can be, devilish wisdom is never valuable. But James is arguing there's a place for these things, but these kind of wisdom cannot replace the fourth kind of wisdom, because true wisdom is both knowledge and the capacity to make use of that knowledge. Wisdom is not just about Googling something. Wisdom is not just about learning the facts about something. Wisdom is not just about trusting the latest methods because they are new, or trusting the older methods because they are old. Wisdom is about seeking knowledge and seeking God to learn what we should do and how we should apply that knowledge. So the fourth kind of wisdom that James talks about is wisdom that comes from above. James says in chapter 3, but wisdom from above is first of all pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. This kind of wisdom is needed in order to understand how to know and how to apply the other kinds of wisdom. And notice that James is judging wisdom by its fruit. He says, when you have godly wisdom at work, it is pure. Godly wisdom is pure. There's a goodness and there's a purity that flows out of godly wisdom. It's peace-loving and gentle at all times. Godly wisdom leads to peace. Godly wisdom leads to solutions that offer a peaceful way forward, and they just kind of settle into people's spirits as something that is right. Godly wisdom is gentle. It's approached in a gentle way. It's approached in a prepared and thoughtful way. It yields to others. It's the opposite of selfish ambition. It's the opposite of jealousy. Godly wisdom yields to others. It genuinely cares about others. It's full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no favoritism. It doesn't lead to solutions that are only for the privileged. It doesn't lead to solutions that are only for the elites. It doesn't lead to solutions that are only for one group of people. It leads to solutions that benefit everybody. It shows no favoritism. It's always sincere. Those who use this kind of wisdom will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So when James says in chapter 1, if any of you needs wisdom, he's not talking about intellectual wisdom, although there's a place for intellectual wisdom. He's not talking about earthly wisdom, although there's a place for earthly wisdom. There's a place for practical wisdom. He's certainly not talking about devilish wisdom. He's talking about godly wisdom, wisdom that is from above. When we're looking for wisdom about what to do with the troubles that we're going through, when we were looking for wisdom about what to do with our son, our 6-year-old son, there were so many different options, so many different and competing ideas about what to do, but none of those really mattered because what we really needed was God's wisdom. We had the knowledge. We needed to know exactly the right way to apply what we knew in order to find the best solution. And by the way, by God's grace, Michael survived. He turned out great. He's a great young man. He loves the Lord. He's doing so great. Some hope for all of you parents that are maybe struggling to figure out what to do in a situation that you're in right now. But the answer was not in all of these kinds of wisdom. The answer we could only find in God. James says, ask our generous God. But then James goes off, and what he says next, we can find 3 questions that we can ask ourselves as we are looking for wisdom. If we really want wisdom from above, first question is this: who is your faith in? James says, but when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. In other words, before you ask God for wisdom, there's a gut check that needs to happen. Is God your main thing? Or is God your backup plan? Is God your first plan? Is God your only plan? Or do you have another plan? Are you like, well, we'll try whatever God leads us to try out of this situation. We'll try it his way for a little while. If that doesn't work, then we'll go our own way. There's all kinds of options that we can choose from. So we'll try God for about a minute or a month or a year. But if God doesn't come through, then it's over. We're moving on to plan B. James says, no, that's not going to work. You see, the only way that wisdom from above works is if you are all in. Be sure that your faith is in God alone. Here's the thing that happens to us when we go through trouble and we're seeking wisdom about what to do. Trouble has a way of defining us. And trouble has a way of shaping us. Trouble can either pull us away from God or trouble can pull us closer to God. And how we respond is really up to us. I've got a friend who was going through some serious trouble in his life over the last few months. And one of the first things that he said to me when we got together to talk about it, he said, Steve, I have been drifting away from God over the last while, and this trouble that I'm going through right now, it is drawing me back to God. He says, I am praying like I haven't prayed in a long time. I'm calling out to God. I'm trusting God. I'm seeking God for wisdom. I am all in with God. And my first thought was, that is the best decision that you can possibly make right now. God is going to honor that. God is going to honor that heart. Whatever the results of your situation, God is going to honor that, and God is going to bless you for choosing to allow this trouble to pull you close to him. Who is your faith in? When you ask for wisdom, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Second question to ask, are you willing to hold fast to nothing but God? James says, do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. In other words, if you are all in, not only in seeking God for wisdom about what to do, but also in following through with what God leads you to do, if you're all in, if you're holding fast to God and to God alone, not only will God give you wisdom, but God will give you peace. No matter what the results may be, you may not get the results you want, but if you're all in with God, if you choose to just trust him and believe, and you do not waver, and you hold fast to nothing but God alone, then you will be settled, you will be at peace, you will be in smooth water. Things might not go your way. God is not giving us a blank check here. We might put our trust in God. We might make the wisest choice possible that God will lead us on, but we may not get the result we want. But the point is that you will have peace if you seek God and trust God with all your heart. Remember, wisdom from above. What were the descriptors when James talked about wisdom from above? It was words like peace, and words like gentleness, and words like loving, and words like sincere. Wisdom from above leads to those things. And when you're in the middle of a hurricane, you want to be at the center of it, because actually that's the place of peace and calm. When there's a hurricane going on and you find yourself, if you can get to the eye of the storm, it's actually incredibly calm in the eye of the storm. The storm is swirling around you and you're calm in the midst of it. And that, when you're going through trouble in your life, that eye of the storm, that's where God is. So many of us want to try to run from trouble, and we end up getting blasted by it, when really what we need to do is run to the center of it and get to it, and that's where God is. That's where the solution is. That's where the ideas are going to come from about how to figure this out. That's where God's going to show you what you need to do, but that's where the peace is. It's in the middle of the storm, facing the trouble head on with God. That's where the peace is. Third question. Are you willing to put God first in all things? James says such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. In other words, you can't receive God's wisdom if God does not have first place in your life. James goes on to say their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. So 3 questions. Who is your faith in? Are you willing to hold fast to God? Are you willing to put God first in all things? The reality is, when we're looking for wisdom from God in these kind of situations, we're looking for a rhema word from God. We're looking for revelation from God. We're needing God to reveal to us the right solution, the right attitude, the right heart, the right spirit. We're looking for God to reveal just the right thing to do for that moment. And James is making the point here that you can't receive God's wisdom if your heart is not aligned with God. Because it's not about earthly wisdom. You can get all the best advice in the world. It's not about intellectual wisdom. You can have all the science-based answers in the world. All of those things can be good and helpful and important to research and to understand and to ask about. But the answer that you really need is, God, what do I do with all of those options? God, what do I do with all that I know? God, what do I do with all of this in this situation? God, give me wisdom. And if your heart is not aligned with God, then what happens is you're not at the center of the storm, because you're trying to kind of run away from the storm. You're getting caught away from it. If your heart is not aligned by God, then you're not in the center of the storm, and you're not in the place of protection, and you're not in the place of peace, and you're just getting blasted by all of this that's going on around you. If your heart is not aligned with God, you might not hear him speaking. Think about it. If your heart is just not in tune with God in the midst of this trouble, and God is talking to you and he's giving you wisdom, you might not hear him speaking in the midst of all the other noise. If your heart is not aligned with God, then you might not receive from him. You might hear from him, but your heart is going to go, oh, I don't want to do that. God, don't lead me in that direction. I don't want to do that. You might hear from him, but you might not want to receive what you're hearing from him. But if you ask, and if God is at the center of your asking, God will give you wisdom. I love this verse from Jesus in Mark chapter 11. I tell you, you can pray for anything, and if you believe that you've received it, it will be yours. And I think that James has this teaching of Jesus in mind here when he's saying, if any of you needs wisdom, God is going to grant you wisdom. Just make sure that you are seeking him with all of your heart. And if you believe that you've received it, it will be yours. James is kind of in line here with Jesus' teaching on this. Or this verse from Proverbs, for the Lord grants wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. So God is not going to rebuke you for asking. God is not going to rebuke you for asking. God is going to give you wisdom. 4 ways that you can pray for wisdom today. First way you can pray is maybe you need to pray, God, I want to remember who you are. God, I want to remember who you are. Sometimes you just need to remember who God is. The troubles that you're going through right now, God is able to use those troubles, first of all, to draw you closer to him. And maybe God is using those troubles to draw you back to his heart. And maybe you just need to say, God, I want to remember who you are. I want to remember what you've done in my life. I want to remember what you've done for me in the past, because I'm going to need to use that memory of how you've been there for me in the past as I'm facing this trouble, as I'm facing this situation. God, I want to remember who you are. Draw me close to you. God, I'm going to embrace you in this trial. I'm going to find joy in the midst of this trial, but draw me close to you. And second way you can pray for wisdom, Lord, I'm facing an impossible situation and I need you. Just a simple prayer, just a simple cry. God, I am facing this situation. It looks impossible. With my earthly eyes, all that I can see is trouble coming out of this. With my earthly eyes, all I can see is problem after problem after problem, and I don't know how to respond, and I don't know how to deal with this. God, I'm facing this impossible situation, and I need you. What's your impossible situation today? Sometimes we're afraid to start to ask God to do impossible things. We don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to be disappointed. We're not sure if God is going to come through. Sometimes we're embarrassed. We're ashamed to ask God for impossible things, and yet impossible situations are exactly like what James is talking about in James chapter 1. He's saying when troubles come and you are in an impossible situation, ask God for wisdom. God is going to give you wisdom. Third way you can pray, Jesus, give me courage to ask others to pray for me. This is one of my problems is a lot of times I'll go through troubles kind of on my own, and then I'll talk with people about them after I've gone through them, or I'll share them in a sermon after I've gone through them, after I've kind of figured it out. But when I'm going through it, I'm just kind of not sure if I can talk to somebody about this. And so this is kind of my thing, but sometimes we need to say, Jesus, give me courage to ask others to pray for me. Give me courage to just share this with somebody. You can't do this alone. You need to reach out. You need somebody in your life, somebody to hold you up, somebody to walk through this with you. Who do you have in your life right now that might be ready to hear about this situation and might be ready to pray with you? Who have you met along the way in your life's journey, even if you haven't seen them for 20 years, but you just know if you called them up, they would be there and they would talk with you and they would walk you through it and they would pray along with you. Our prayer team is here every Sunday. We have somebody in the prayer room during services, and they would love to pray just that God would give you wisdom. All it takes is the courage for us to get up and on our way out, just slip into that prayer room and say, I need some help. I need you to pray along with me. Fourth, you can pray, Father, give me courage and discernment to pray specifically. To pray specifically. Give me courage to pray specifically. Lord, here's what I really need. It's not just wisdom about all of this. It's wisdom about this particular situation. God, I need this situation to resolve somehow. And give me the courage to pray specifically, to pray boldly, to trust that you will provide and that you will answer. I just want to bow our heads in our hearts in prayer this morning. Just as we go to prayer, I want you to think about whatever trouble it is that you're facing right now in your life, or maybe you have somebody close to you who's walking through trouble. So maybe you're thinking about your own situation, maybe you're thinking about somebody else and they're walking through trouble, and I just want you to just be honing in on one of those two things. What is it that God is saying to you about that trouble? What is it that God's saying to you this morning as you've been sitting here for this last 35 minutes or so? What has God been saying to you? What has he been saying to you over the last week, over the last months, however this has been going on? What is God saying to you? Just ponder that for a moment. What is God speaking to you about? Maybe it's just a word of peace. Maybe it's a word of trust. Maybe it's a word of confirmation. Maybe it's a word of encouragement. Maybe it's a word of blessing. Maybe God is just saying, just trust me. Maybe God is saying, I'm here. Maybe God is saying, hey, maybe lean into me, take a little bit more time to pray. What's God saying to you? And the second question, what are you going to do about what God is saying to you? Maybe God is saying, hey, you need to have a conversation with this person. You've been running away from this storm. You need to run to the eye of the storm. You need to seek. That's where peace is. That's where God is. You need to deal with this situation. And God is saying, you got to do it. You got to have that conversation. What is God asking you to do with what he's saying? Maybe God's saying you need a day of prayer. You need to take a day and you just need to find a way to just get away and just pray. You need a few hours in prayer. You just need to seek me. What's God asking you to do that's going to help you to find wisdom, to find your way through this trouble? So Father God, I thank you and I praise you for today. I thank you, Lord, for all of the moms who are here today. We bless you for them. We thank you for their incredible role in our lives. And God, we bring before you our troubles. And yes, we want to face those with joy and with hope. But Lord, we need wisdom. And God, I ask that you would speak to us right now and show us wisdom. Earthly wisdom, great. Intellectual wisdom, valuable. Show us what is devilish wisdom so we can run away from that. But we need wisdom from above. The kind of wisdom that can give us peace, gentleness. It's not self-seeking. It can lead to the best solution. God, would you show us that way, I pray. In Jesus' name. Before we do the benediction, there's a little gift for mothers out after the service in the hallway just down and to the left. So after you've gone to the prayer room to pray, go there and get your gift for the ladies. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you and give you his perfect peace. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, amen. Have a fantastic day. Be blessed. We'll see you again next Sunday.